Now, returning to the plans being unveiled today, which are aimed at stopping people from arriving in the UK so-called illegally on small boats. With me is the former Justice Secretary and former Lord Chancellor, Sir Robert Buckland. Hi, it's good to see you.
Good morning, Kate.
How is this plan going to work?
Well, as I understand it, the plans, which are going to have an immediate legal effect, are designed to restrict the ability of people who come here unlawfully to even claim asylum. Now, that sounds pretty...
They don't come unlawfully, though, do they? They don't come unlawfully.
Well, look, my view is that we've got a lot of people here who've come through safe routes, and the Prime Minister quite rightly said that he wanted to do more to expand safe routes of passage and lawful routes of passage. That seems to me to be really important and sensible, because by establishing safe routes, it means that people who are either exploited or are using these routes to come over the small boats route clearly aren't taking advantage of what would be safe and legal routes of passage. Now, it's very difficult for the government. I absolutely understand the quandary they're in. I was having to wrestle with it when I was in government, and clearly there's massive public concern about the seeming inability of the authorities to deport people who've exhausted their rights of appeal here in this country. Now, if the legislation is able to fairly deal with that, I think it will deserve support. But I think this is going to be judged by practice and what happens in the next few months. That's going to be vital.
Sure, but presently it is not unlawful to travel across the Channel like this. It's unlawful to smuggle people across the Channel like this, but these people who are seeking a better life in the United Kingdom are not acting unlawfully. We've heard from the Home Secretary today. She's written in the Telegraph saying, we've pushed the boundaries of international law to solve this crisis. Well, that's going to be challenged time and again in the courts, isn't it?
Well, it does sound like it. I mean, I've had assurances that the government isn't seeking to break international law. That's its obligations under European Convention on Human Rights, the Refugee Convention. I welcome that, because I think a lot of other countries in Europe and elsewhere are struggling with this problem. And I think it would be a bit of a free-for-all for everybody to try and do their own thing in a way that is not coordinated. There have to be there has to be a proper process to allow genuine claimants, of which we get many into our country, to make their claims in a proper way. So I'll be looking very carefully to see in this new legislation whether there will still be those exceptions to allow perhaps the woman from Iran who refuses to wear the hijab, or the refugee coming from a war-torn part of the world who clearly is coming for the right reasons, to be able to seek asylum here in the UK. That's our tradition, and I think it's something that we should support, even though we do need to deal with what has become a really pernicious problem.
OK, 5 years ago, the then Home Secretary Sajid Javid said there were rising numbers of small boats and it was a major incident, he was going to sort it. 2 years ago, Priti Patel promised to stop gangs and to push boats back if necessary. Rishi Sunak has previously said, we've heard plans like this before. We've heard plans like this before.
I know, and we've had a lot of over-promising and under-delivering. What I like about the tone and approach of this Prime Minister is that he acknowledges that this is a huge challenge. It's not easy. I think what he wants to do is go one step at a time, but also not just rely on legislation here in Westminster, but to take action more generally and internationally to see what can be done to avert the problem from reaching the Channel in the first place. And that's why I think his talks with the French government are going to be very important. It's clear to me that...
We've given them £300 million since 2014. What have we got to show for it?
Well, I mean, this is an issue. It does seem to have been thus far that there's been a reluctance to do something really deep-seated here. I think mainly because the French think that there should be a negotiation with the EU more generally. And, of course, they have a point that, refugees or people seeking to come to Western Europe, it's not about national borders. It's about the fact that Western Europe is an attractive place to come economically for many, many people. And therefore, it seems to me that international action, for example, action that could end the camps in the north of France, that could end the way in which, in effect, there's a route of passage through which allows exploitation, needs to be the order of the day. And the Prime Minister, has said that he wants to do more internationally. He announced that deal with Albania, which I thought was a significant breakthrough. Okay, there's no poetry in this. this. You know, there's no simple sweeping answer. It's going to take hard grind and individual action with certain countries which are the source of the problem.
But as geopolitics changes, will it not correct itself?
Well, look, I don't have a crystal ball. I think we can say that with the geopolitics of the sub-Saharan region, the geopolitics of Eastern Europe, we are facing increasing conflict, a lack of resources, a fight for those resources. Western Europe is seen as a safe haven economically and politically. We are going to be an attractive place for people to come, and we're not sundered by thousands of miles of sea. Some people might say,
what's wrong with that?
Well, look, I've always said that where people have a genuine reason to want to seek asylum, then we should welcome them. We've always done so. We've done so for hundreds of years. But it is important that our fair systems are not abused and that we are not, in effect, taken for a ride by people who are exploiting others and who are seeking to make a profit out of criminality.
We spent a fortune, as I said, with the French, 300 million. We've given the Rwandan government 200 million thereabouts, £500 million. What have we actually got to show for it?
Well, I think with Rwanda, we're very much in the early stages of that scheme.
It was Priti Patel who came up with that.
It was.
And not one person has been sent to Rwanda.
And I think that the High Court has ruled that the framework is lawful. They were very critical of the individual cases that were processed. Clearly, the Home Office has got to do its homework and do better in order to process cases like that. But I think Rwanda is actually a small part of a bigger response that is needed. As I've mentioned, I think it's essential that we do a further and comprehensive deal with France and indeed other European countries if we can, and that the Prime Minister uses a raft of different approaches here in order to deal with a problem that, if this particular manifestation of small boats disappears, might pop up again in lorries, as we had some years ago.
I get that there's an increase in small boats because you've managed to plug the gap when it comes to lorries. I get that. But nevertheless, 40,000 people, 45,000 people came across the Channel last year. Something like 200, even if it does work, will be going to Rwanda. What are you going to do with the others?
Well,
what do you think about this idea about dilapidated cruise ships or old military camps?
Well, I mean, military camps...
Sounds inhumane.
Well, they have to be humane. And I'm not against the idea of using sensible facilities that can work in a humane way. Hotels are clearly a very expensive option here. In fact, the only option that the government has at the moment, and that's not proving to be a universal success, to say the least. So I understand the quandary that the government is in, but unless there is more of an international approach to this, and unless there is that attempt to try and root out the cause of this and the roots that I used, then I think that legislation on its own will not achieve the results that some people think that it can achieve.
Let me put this to you finally, if I may, Sir Robert, and that is, I'm sure it'll be a surprise to a lot of our viewers this morning, the biggest number of people who have stayed illegally in the United Kingdom are those that have overstayed their visas, and they've come here legally. What are you going to do about them?
Well, Kate, it's a very, very good question. There's clearly an issue here as to process and as to the way in which these particular regimes are policed. I think that we've got to be honest about migration. My view is that if students are here, as long as they're going back at the end of their courses and are not outstaying their visas unlawfully, I don't really think we should be counting them as immigrants in the sense of people wanting to stay here permanently. If you do that, you get a much more realistic sense of what is going on. But, you know, I've said for a long time, we have a number of people here who've come to this country, slipped through the net, are probably working under the radar, not paying their tax. We need to address that issue as well. And that's why I think that, you know, with all these backlogs of people waiting for their claims to be processed, why aren't they putting something productive back into our society? Perhaps they do some work. Well, Kate, my view is that I think we should. Yeah. You know, I've said after 6 months they should be working, and then we'll know where they are.
We won't be able to if we put them on a cruise ship, will we?
Well, yeah, look, I think that there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions to this problem that actually don't get near solving it. And what I'm hearing from the Prime Minister is a much more grown-up approach to this, an honest assessment that this is tough, but also an acknowledgement that legislation on its own will not be enough, and that unless we get that international cooperation, this problem will not be solved for Britain and indeed for other countries in Western Europe that are facing equal pressures.
Sir Robert, it's always great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Kate.
You.